The Mystery House, an American suburban legend. Let me take you on a journey into the heart of American suburbia, where the immaculate lawns and symmetrical streets barely hint at the deep, unsettling secrets some houses may hold. At the edge of Springfield, Illinois, a city known more for its Abraham Lincoln heritage and tranquil parks than for ghost stories, there sits a modern six-bedroom house that has unwittingly become the focal point of feverish rumor and hushed conversations. To locals and the curious alike, it is simply called the Cursed House. But on property records, it is formally listed as 4567 Willow Avenue. At first glance, the house is the very model of American affluence, large bay windows catching the soft afternoon light, a wide porch inviting friendly chats, and a perfectly paved driveway. The roofline is stark and elegant, blending contemporary architecture with those comforting touches that define a forever home. Yet beneath this facade of suburban normalcy, people speak of the address in anxious whispers. Taxi drivers rarely take passengers there after dark. Teenagers dare each other to knock on the door, and a peculiar chill seems to hang, almost undetectable, around the old willow tree out front, even in the sweltering Midwest summers. But what could turn a piece of the American dream into a symbol of dread? For Springfield's residents, the answer lies in a string of tragedies that unfolded over just a handful of years. The tragic demise of 3 generations of the Watson family within these very walls, and the way these deaths defied easy explanation, planted the idea that the house itself was cursed, or, at the very least, that something deeply unnatural had stained its foundation. Sensational headlines, true crime podcasts, and the collective imagination of Springfield's community only heightened the legends and echoes of grief surrounding Willow Avenue. Of course, in a country raised on horror movies and mystery fiction, Americans are no strangers to haunted house stories. The difference here is how recent and painfully real this case remains. While some write it all off as a statistical anomaly or bad luck, others insist they've seen strange lights flicker on in empty rooms or heard voices when no one was inside. Even after its extensive renovation and change of ownership, the shadow of the Watson tragedy lingers. Real estate agents struggle to sell homes too close to the infamous address, and newcomers are quickly warned not to ask too many questions. Yet if you dig a little deeper, past the urban legends and the fearful gossip, what you discover are hidden wounds of a family's breakdown, the missteps of local law enforcement, and tangled motives that have nothing to do with the supernatural. The Cursed House stands not simply as the backdrop for neighborhood ghost stories, but as a testament to the complex, sometimes tragic tapestry of American family life. As we delve into this chilling narrative, prepare to reassess everything you think you know about evil, fate, and the meaning of home. The Owner's Family, tragedies rooted in love. At the core of the Willow Lane legend lies the Caldwell family. Ordinary in appearance, extraordinary in misfortune. The patriarch, Michael Caldwell, was a second-generation school principal, a man of quiet integrity with a warm laugh that often echoed through the halls of his home. He and his wife Lorraine, a bright and determined former TV news anchor, moved to Willow Lane in the late 1980s, hoping to raise their future in a neighborhood that promised safety, stability, and neighborly support. Together, they adopted Ethan, a chubby-cheeked 6-month-old with a mop of dark curls and solemn, curious eyes. Lorraine, unable to bear children, felt her dreams come true the moment she first held Ethan, her love for him fierce, almost desperate. Years at Willow Lane passed with a sense of fulfillment and unity. Michael read bedtime stories sipping hot cocoa, Lorraine filled scrapbooks with Ethan's milestones, and their backyard echoed with birthday parties and lemonade stands. Yet beneath this idyllic tapestry, fractures formed. Lorraine's ambitions as a former television personality meant she wrestled with the quieter pace of small-town family life, and Michael's gentle rigidities clashed, in small ways, with her passionate moods. Ethan, meanwhile, struggled with undiagnosed anxiety, leading to isolation in school. The Caldwells, tight-knit as they appeared, were forced to navigate these storms with little guidance but immense love. As Ethan hit adulthood, he met Taylor, an energetic, compassionate veterinary assistant several years his junior. Taylor's warmth filled the gaps in Ethan's guarded heart, and the two soon fell into a relationship heavy on laughter and gentle understanding. Their wedding, thrown on the Willow Lane lawn, became the talk of the neighborhood. Unity, renewal, and American hope embodied by young love under lantern-strung trees. But love, as it so often does, bred new complexities. Ethan's struggle for self-assurance, Taylor's desire to start a family of her own, Lorraine's growing sense of being left behind, and Michael's increasing frailty all grated against one another in subtle, heartbreaking ways. Arguments between Lorraine and Taylor, differences over childcare or career paths, became a repetitive background noise, never erupting but always smoldering. Ethan and Taylor had 2 children, Oliver, the precocious bookworm, and Jamie, spirited and creative. For a time the house brimmed with joy again, children racing down the hallways, Taylor inviting neighbors for summer barbecues, yet tragedy slowly crept in, invisible but relentless. Michael, the family rock, suffered a sudden health crisis. Lorraine withdrew into herself, suspicion and old hurt compounding every conversation with Ethan and Taylor. Legal disputes over guardianship, whispered accusations of neglect, and eventually, divorce sundered the family's foundation. Ethan, desperate to preserve his relationship with his children, dug in for a brutal custody fight with Taylor, all under the shadow of mounting rumors about the curse of Willow Lane. Despite it all, deep threads of love continued to tie the Caldwells together, even as their story soured into heartbreak and calamity. Their journey, rooted less in malice and more in love stretched past its breaking point, demonstrates how even the warmest American dreams can unravel amid the strains of hope, ambition, and the desperate need for belonging. This is not merely a ghost story, but a study of how love, when tested by personal flaws and cruel chance, can become the seed of tragedy in the heart of an American home. 3 haunting deaths. Within 4,567 Willow Avenue. The true transformation of the house from a symbol of prosperity to that of a haunting legend began with 3 unimaginable deaths, all unfolding within a 4-year span, all under the same roof. The very foundation seemed to absorb each tragedy, thickening the air with an unseen but palpable grief. It began one rainy Friday in April when Michael Caldwell, having spent a long day volunteering at the local school, did not return calls from a worried Lorraine. She arrived home to unfamiliar darkness, the porch light out, dinner unheated, and somehow, something in the air was simply wrong. She found Michael collapsed at the base of the stairwell, his pulse forever gone. An autopsy cited sudden cardiac arrest, but Lorraine's suspicions were fanned by the bruises along his neck and chest, marks no one could quite explain. Local authorities, citing procedural precedents, ruled it a tragic accident. Yet in whispers Lorraine shared her doubts. Michael was fit, no history of heart trouble, and the physical evidence seemed off. The neighborhood's first ripple of unease grew deeper. Barely 14 months later, another Caldwell, this time, Lorraine herself, was found lifeless by a stunned grandchild who'd returned ahead of schedule from a tutoring session. Lorraine lay crumpled awkwardly just a few feet from where Michael had died. The same ambiguous bruising marked her throat and hands. The forensic team flagged undetermined causes. Word traveled fast, from the police radio down to the school bus stop. Could fate truly be this cruel, or was someone preying on the Caldwell family? Now, rumors of the cursed house took on a sharper, more menacing edge. The Caldwell children were shuffled between caregivers, each glance at 4,567 Willow Avenue, carrying an extra pinch of dread. The third and most shocking death came scarcely a year later. Ethan, who had shouldered the weight of loss and suspicion, and who many assumed would carry the family name into a gentler era, was found dead in the very bedroom where he'd grown up. The morning after a Little League baseball game with his son, Ethan failed to show up to work and didn't answer his phone. His best friend and the housekeeper, arriving amid mounting worry, discovered him sprawled on the bed. Scratches, broken cartilage in his neck, and obvious signs of a struggle told a story more sinister than the coroner's original theories. Now, neighbors spoke openly. 3 deaths in 4 years, none with a satisfying explanation, all in the same supposedly safe home. These were no longer idle superstitions. There was a pattern, a chilling undertow in the narrative of the house. Each death pointed to a silent, methodical malice, a force as yet unnamed prowling within that beautiful home. Community trust in local law enforcement eroded as accusations of incompetence or blindness to domestic strife mounted. The house stood as a silent witness to secrets so powerful they seemed to warp reality, each echoing tragedy locking it ever tighter within the realm of haunted American legend. John and Rachel, a love that defied prejudice. If there was ever a testament to the complexities and courage of American love stories, it was written by John and Rachel Evans. Their marriage, forged in the heart of a conservative Midwestern community, stood as a quiet rebellion against the social mores and racial prejudices of late 20th century America. This was not merely a union of two people, it was an act of faith, and sometimes, a battle. John Evans grew up in the historically black neighborhood of East Springfield, Illinois. An only child, John was adopted as an infant by Frank Evans, a hard-working postal supervisor, respected for his fairness and decency, and Alice Evans, a beloved former local TV anchor whose career in the 1960s and 70s had made her a familiar face. The interracial couple already faced whispers and unkind stares every time they walked downtown together. Still, they raised John in a home filled with love, intellect, and a subtle but powerful message. You are seen, and you belong. Alice's family's roots were of Irish and Italian descent, her pale skin and red hair a constant contrast to Frank's deep, smooth brown. In those days, theirs was a marriage that not only raised eyebrows but sometimes provoked outright hostility. Frank always used humor to diffuse tension, but Alice, fiercely intelligent and charismatic, never shied away from standing up for her husband or her son. They all accepted the price of being different with bittersweet grace. John, consequently, grew up empathetic and self-reliant, always aware of the lines people drew between themselves, but determined to cross them. John met Rachel Taylor when they were both students at a local community college. Rachel, the daughter of conservative church-going parents, had grown up in a world of Sunday services, bake sales, and warnings about staying with your own. She was shy, careful with her words, yet drawn to John's wit and gentle strength. He, in turn, was captivated by her quiet resolve and the ways she challenged his perceptions, not with confrontation, but with kindness and curiosity. Their early courtship unfolded under the shadow of disapproval from both sides. Rachel's parents viewed John with suspicion, unable to move beyond the color of his skin, and fearful for the difficulties their daughter might face. Frank and Alice had reservations too, worried that Rachel, lovely but soft-spoken, would be overwhelmed by the realities of being an interracial couple in a scrutinizing community. But John and Rachel saw in each other the fulfillment of something both had yearned for: acceptance without condition. They married in a simple chapel ceremony. Many seats were empty, but those who did attend came away convinced of the couple's quiet devotion, a bond unyielding and earnest. Over the next years, John and Rachel settled into the renovated house on Willow Avenue. They shared chores, argued occasionally over groceries, swapped childhood stories under the porch lights, and gradually built a world where their love, and the two children they would eventually adopt, became the anchor against all turbulence. Yet prejudice never completely withdrew. It simply lurked, sometimes flaring up in snide comments at PTA meetings or foreboding phone calls from Rachel's estranged relatives. John and Rachel handled it with the resilience they'd honed, a mixture of humor, patience, and relentless faith in each other and their chosen family. Their love was not without cost. Some friendships faded, leaving a sense of lingering loss. Rachel struggled with recurring doubts, fighting to reconcile her upbringing with the reality of the life she'd chosen. John, for his part, grappled with moments of quiet anger, questioning why happiness had to be defended at every turn. Still, they endured, knowing that within the walls of their home, they had broken a cycle and created a sanctuary. Their story, though shadowed by later tragedy, remains an indelible proof that love, in all its forms, can be an act more radical than any rebellion. Fleeting joy and ominous signs. Those early days in the Harrison family's suburban oasis on Willow Avenue were bathed in the golden light of hope and possibility. After their whirlwind romance and modest wedding, John and Emily Harrison took their first uncertain steps into marriage with the best intentions, both yearning to counteract the scars of their own upbringings. It was a home that promised a fresh start, and for a brief moment in time, laughter rang throughout the freshly painted halls, bringing warmth to every corner of that six-bedroom house. John, the quiet cornerstone of the family, often stayed up late, unboxing furniture, planning improvements, and imagining birthday parties under the backyard maple. Emily's gentle touch was everywhere, photos of their children framed on the mantel, a song on her lips as she packed their lunchboxes before sunrise. Their children, one studious and shy, the other a free spirit, gave the house its true heartbeat. Weekends saw the back patio transformed for family cookouts, soccer balls tracing wild arcs over the lawn, and neighbors pausing to remark on just how vibrant the Harrisons seemed compared to the somber folk up the street. But as every American tale reminds us, perfection is but a passing illusion. It began with small, easy-to-dismiss disturbances, unexplained cold spots in the hallway, kitchen appliances flickering momentarily, and uneasy dreams that left Emily glancing nervously toward locked doors at night. John, practical and ever skeptical, reasoned away each episode as nothing more than a hiccup of old house wiring or nerves wound tight by new responsibilities. Still, the unease grew more insistent as months ticked by. Emily's smile, once constant and genuine, now flashed like a warning light. Friends visiting commented that she looked thinner, more distracted, her singing now shadowed by a certain tension that was hard to pinpoint. Financial stress crept in next as John's hours at work were cut and Emily, caring for their children, could not easily return to her old veterinary job. Arguments, once rare, now erupted over bills left unpaid, questionable purchases, or which in-law was more meddlesome. Compounding these issues were vague reports from their children, whispered stories at bedtime about shadows moving in the hall, or a cold, heavy presence that settled over them when alone. At first, Emily dismissed these as childish imaginings, consequences of too many ghost stories traded on the school bus. Until, one stormy night, she awoke to find her daughter standing silently in the corridor, wide-eyed and trembling, claiming she'd heard someone call her name from within the walls. The turning point came with a string of increasingly bizarre incidents: food spoiling overnight, a shattered family heirloom discovered in the upper hallway with no obvious cause, the dog refusing to enter the living room for days. John finally raised the topic with neighbors, only to find that rumors about the house's tragic history had quietly resurfaced. Paranoia or not, the Harrisons could no longer ignore that the safe American dream they'd coveted was splintering at its edges, the line between bad luck and something more sinister growing fainter with each passing week. Though no single moment signaled disaster, it was clear in hindsight that their joy was but a fragile overlay on a deep, persistent undercurrent of unease. These subtle, accumulating oddities would set the stage for the calamities to come, weaving everyday life with threads of dread and foreboding, and ultimately, forever altering the fate of everyone beneath the roof of 4567 Willow Avenue. The first death. John's father dies in mysterious circumstances. In the summertime of 2009, the small town of Springfield, Illinois, was characteristically slow, a place where the drone of lawnmowers was interrupted only by the distant sound of children playing baseball. But on one otherwise unremarkable Sunday, the Watson family home at 4567 Willow Avenue became the setting for a tragedy so strange and unsettling that, to this day, people in the neighborhood still lower their voices when speaking about it. Sam Watson, John's father, was a man both respected and partially feared in the local community. Burly, quiet, unfailingly polite, and a Vietnam veteran, Sam had survived far worse than the frustrations of middle-class American life. To outside eyes he appeared steady, a fixture at town council meetings, a loving if somewhat strict father, and a loyal husband. Those who knew him best, though, whispered that beneath his calm surface boiled storms left over from the war. He suffered occasional bouts of anger, often retreated into long silences, and had recently been spending more and more time working alone in the garage, where unfinished woodwork and scattered tools hinted at a man searching for peace through order. On the morning of July 14th, John was not at home, a fact that, in retrospect, would later raise as many questions as it answered. He was serving a short sentence for a vehicular incident that had splintered the family's fragile sense of normalcy. That summer, the Watson household was quieter than usual, grief and tension swamping Anna, John's mother, who wore her anxiety like a second skin. Anna's days were structured around keeping her mind off the chaos she could no longer control: gardening, long phone conversations with distant relatives, and, on Sundays, preparing the same roast chicken Sam had loved since their early days together. That particular Sunday, Anna recalls waking with a peculiar sense of unease, a tingling at the back of her neck, and the muffled impression that the silence in their home was too thick, almost deliberate. She busied herself as usual, moving through morning chores and humming old hymns to drown out the anxiety creeping into her thoughts. When she called out for Sam around 10 o'clock, his coffee already cooling on the kitchen table, there was no answer. Hours drifted uneasily by. The Watson household was spacious, but not so large that Sam could vanish entirely. Anna checked the backyard, then the garage, Finding no trace of her husband, she finally ventured upstairs, a mounting dread in her chest. It was then, at the foot of the main staircase, that she spotted his slipper, just one, lying askew on the hallway carpet. A detail so trivial but out of place. As she rounded the corner, Anna's worst fears crystallized. There, sprawled halfway down the staircase with his head bent at an unnatural angle, was Sam. His face, usually so composed, was twisted into a grimace that betrayed pain and terror. Paralyzed by shock, Anna only managed a choked scream after several seconds, the sound ricocheting through the empty house. The paramedics arrived swiftly, followed by local police officers who recognized the Watson address immediately. At first, hope flickered. Perhaps Sam had only slipped, perhaps he could still be saved, but as emergency medical staff quickly discovered, he was cold to the touch, pulseless, his skin already beginning to lose color. There were bruises visible on Sam's neck and collarbone, marks stark and fresh against his sun-weathered skin. Anna, in her haze, kept repeating that her husband had no history of heart trouble, that he had seemed in perfect health the night before. The police, facing a scene both ambiguous and charged with the echo of grief, dutifully cordoned off the staircase and began their investigation. They noted the absence of blood or signs of forced entry, the way Sam's body had come to rest, and the lack of objects nearby that could have tripped him. The cause of death was initially circumstantial, blunt force trauma to the head and chest, possibly from a fall, overlaid with indications of sudden cardiac arrest. The coroner's preliminary assessment pointed to accident, an explanation that Anna, weeping but pragmatic, could almost accept, were it not for the odd pattern of bruises unrelated to a simple fall. As the investigation unfolded, the Watson family's composure began to unravel. Friends and relatives flocked to the house, offering prayers and casseroles, but also questions. What had really happened on those stairs? The community's unease grew when whispers started spreading about Sam's military background. Could he have been targeted or suffered a belated consequence of his past? Some neighbors swore they'd heard shouting from the house the night before, while others dismissed the rumors, insisting Sam's death was a freak accident. Meanwhile, the police seemed eager to close the book on the incident. With John in jail at the time and no evidence of intruders, there was little reason officially to suspect foul play. But Anna was unconvinced. She insisted on a second autopsy, which revealed fractured cartilage in Sam's larynx, a classic sign of strangulation not easily explained by a simple fall. The bruises on his upper chest also didn't correlate with landing on a step. Forensic experts went back and forth debating the origins of the injuries and the likelihood of a quietly planned attack. Yet no new suspects emerged, and the events of that summer day gradually faded from public scrutiny, replaced by the more immediate turmoil of daily life. For Anna, however, the loss never quite dulled. She became haunted by little details: the missing slipper, the faint smell of cologne mixed with fear in the air, the way Sam had seemed agitated for days leading up to his death. She sometimes found herself talking to him late at night, seeking answers in whispered conversations meant for the dead. Even years later, she would shudder when passing the foot of the stairs, her mind replaying that awful image, her husband's unmoving form and the cold certainty that she would never again hear his measured laugh or see his slow smile. Sam's death marked more than the end of a life. It became the central trauma of a family and an unsolved riddle that set the stage for even darker times to come. The shadow it cast lay thick across the Watsons' legacy, coloring the way the house was seen by neighbors, stirring up fears that no renovation, no new layer of paint, and no passage of time could quite erase. In the years that followed, what had once seemed stable crumbled under the weight of speculation, sorrow, and the suspicion that what had happened on that staircase was only the beginning of a much deeper curse laying in wait inside the walls of 4567 Willow Avenue. The truth gradually emerges through strange manifestations. As the days turned into weeks, the search for the Smiths began to feel less like a community rallying around a lost couple, and more like a collective holding of breath, waiting for some truth to surface from the cracks in the family's veneer. The official investigation pressed on, but it was the strange undercurrents of human behavior, those unguarded moments, odd phrases, and silent glances that began to speak the loudest. Among all those involved, it was Kevin Smith whose conduct subtly, and then blatantly, set itself apart. At first, his oddness was easy to dismiss. Friends excused his apparent nonchalance as shock, and neighbors rationalized his jokes and half-hearted shrugs as the facade of a man unwilling to confront grief. But gradually, people noticed patterns that were impossible to ignore. During community vigils, Kevin sometimes lingered on the edge of the candle-lit crowd, his attention wandering even during solemn prayers. He obliged local television interviews but often spoke in tangents, focusing on the strangeness of the media circus, or opining about news anchors, rather than pleading for his parents' return. His smile, when it appeared, was described as offbeat or ill-timed. He once quipped about family drama during a press conference, eliciting awkward silences instead of empathy. He also seemed keenly interested in how the investigation was proceeding, sometimes visiting the police station not with new information but to ask about details. Which leads were being followed? Were any suspects being considered? Had police checked the family trust and property records? Officers initially chalked this up to legitimate anxiety, but the frequency and tone of his inquiries took on a peculiar urgency. Detective Vasquez, who led the missing persons unit, noted in his casebook, "Kevin acts less like a desperate son and more like a nervous observer at a chess match." Friends began to share their reservations with one another. Natalie, a childhood friend of both Mark and Kevin, recounted private conversations where Kevin seemed to dwell on the idea of disappearing, or fantasize aloud about what life would be like without the constraints of family expectations. Once, at a small gathering after a search party returned empty-handed, Kevin mused about how, "No one really knows what goes on inside these houses," his voice tinged with sarcasm. These comments, odd at the time, began to echo with more weight as suspicion grew. Mark, meanwhile, became increasingly withdrawn. He fielded more of the media appearances and remained the primary contact for law enforcement, but he bristled when asked about Kevin's behavior. When pressed by both police and trusted friends, Mark defended his brother with increasing sharpness, insisting the two of them had grieved differently since childhood. Kevin was always the artist, the one who saw the world sideways, he told detectives in a closed interview, his own voice laced with defeat. "That doesn't mean he had anything to do with this. He can't process things like I do." Still, Mark's private worries began to seep through, and his frustration manifested in tense exchanges and missed calls between the brothers. The broader community, having gossiped their way through every conceivable theory, now watched the brothers for clues, sometimes with open curiosity, often with discomfort. At the weekly neighborhood watch meeting, a longtime neighbor hesitantly described seeing Kevin outside the Smith house late at night after his parents' disappearance, standing motionless for nearly an hour in the driveway, staring at the locked front door. Others reported overhearing Kevin talking to himself, rehearsing what sounded like explanations or apologies, though none could recall the words exactly. Several people remarked on the absence of visible grief. No tears, no public breakdown, just an uncanny stillness punctuated by brief flashes of anger or irritation when he felt misunderstood. The mounting psychological strain also seemed to spill out online. In posts on social media, Kevin alternated between sharing old family photos and blunt commentary about how people could never really understand what went wrong behind closed doors. He rebuffed or ignored messages of sympathy, often responding with dark humor. Rumors swelled in virtual spaces as internet sleuths analyzed his behavior, parsing every word and emoji for hidden admissions. Detectives took notice of these anomalies. Focusing on a blend of classic police work and the new realities of social media surveillance, they quietly obtained access to Kevin's online activities. Review of his private messages revealed a pattern: increasingly erratic conversations with a close-knit group of gaming friends, sometimes discussing dark family secrets or hinting at escape fantasies. In one chat, a friend probed Kevin about the case. Kevin's response was jokingly cryptic but unsettling. "Maybe they just needed a break from all of us. Or maybe I did it and this is my origin story." It was hard to tell if this was gallows humor or something worse. As days passed and each new interview, phone record, or home surveillance review failed to turn up physical evidence, investigators grew convinced that answers might lie not in what was present, but in what was absent. Kevin, for all his apparent nonchalance, could not mask certain tells forever. He was observed revisiting specific places from his childhood, his old elementary school, a bridge over a dried-up creek, the concrete remains of a skate park, sometimes leaving flowers or sitting for hours alone. Detectives began to wonder whether these visits marked sentimental mourning, or perhaps unspoken confessions. Tension in the Smith family's inner circle continued to escalate. Mark, urged by some family friends, attempted to confront Kevin directly about his behavior. The resulting conversation, overheard by a neighbor through thin apartment walls, was described as painful, a lot of raised voices but mostly just sadness. No accusations were directly stated, but the silence that followed seemed more telling than the words exchanged. It was as if the weight of what had and had not been spoken was now heaviest upon them both. The investigation, armed with these collective observations and the compilation of behavioral oddities, finally reached a crossroads. It wasn't just about the missing evidence. It was about the mosaic of human reaction to trauma, guilt, and the secrets families keep. Kevin's ability to stand out, not simply as a grieving son but as a person adrift in his own contradictions, had inadvertently drawn a new sharper circle of suspicion around him. The truth, the community realized, might not emerge from a clue as clean as a fingerprint or a stray receipt, but from the small, cumulative weight of strangeness that had come day by day to define his presence, and the haunting absence of his parents. John's death, the fateful night, and the final call. The night John Watson died, the oppressive heat of a late summer clung to every surface of 4567 Willow Avenue. The sun had set hours before, but the air, the kind that made shirts stick and tempers fray, lingered in each room. John, carrying the fatigue of a suburban Father's Day, had just returned from his son's Little League game. Red dust still marked his sneakers, and grass stains clung to his pants. Despite his exhaustion, there was a flicker of peace in his eyes. A father's pride, in the way his boy had batted a home run, and for a moment, the house seemed to hum with hope, pushing back against its legacy of grief. He tucked his son in bed, double-checked the windows, then retreated to his room as the clock neared midnight. He called his girlfriend Amy, their conversation filled with gentle laughter and small talk. How was her work trip? Did she miss his cooking? Would they take the kids to the zoo next weekend? The sound of her voice seemed to soften his ever-present anxiety. As the call ended, John paused before hanging up, whispering into the dark, "I love you." He placed the phone on the nightstand, the screen briefly illuminating his worn features, then switched off the light. Silence descended, heavy and absolute. Sometime after midnight, as a freight train passed in the distance and the neighborhood was shrouded in uneasy quiet, something shifted within the Watson home. The security light in the backyard flickered, a delicate shadow slinking across the window. The family dog, Marley, began growling low in his throat but uncharacteristically didn't bark or run for his master. In the hallway a floorboard creaked. John, halfway between sleep and the kind of alertness that comes from years of living in worry, felt unease prickle his neck. He heard the faintest shuffle, a sound as subtle and stealthy as a mouse but unmistakably human. Sitting up, his breath caught. He listened, every sense straining, heart beating a taut staccato. A figure, a silhouette backlit by hallway light, appeared at the bedroom door. John instinctively reached for the baseball bat he kept beside his dresser, a leftover habit from darker times. The intruder paused, studying him. For Jason the memory would later blur, the metallic tang of fear in his mouth, the pressure in his chest, the knowledge that his children were in the next room. John called out in a firm, even tone, "Who's there?" No response. The figure advanced and the room erupted in struggle. There was a crash. The lamp shattered as John swung the bat. Furniture scraped, feet pounded against the floor, and Marley erupted in frantic barking. Neighbors later reported hearing a short, sharp cry, then silence. The altercation lasted less than 90 seconds. When it was done, the intruder vanished into the night, leaving devastation behind. The next morning, everything was wrong. Amy, trying to reach John to check on him, as they always did after late-night talks, grew concerned when her calls went to voicemail. The housekeeper arrived at 4567 Willow Avenue at 9 o'clock, keys trembling in her hands as she noticed the front door, slightly ajar, and the dog's anxious yelps inside. Pushing inside, she called out for John, her voice hollow in the echoing house. She found him sprawled on the bedroom floor, half covered by a blanket, with bruises blooming across his neck and forearms. Blood flecked the edge of the nightstand and the broken lamp. His cell phone lay discarded nearby, the call log open to Amy's number. The room was thick with that scent of copper and finality. John was gone, and nothing would ever be the same for the Watson family. Within hours the police arrived, cordoned off the house, and began the slow, methodical process of searching for evidence. The children, thankfully untouched and still asleep, somehow slept through the commotion, were hurried away by family friends, their confusion mounting with the sight of flashing lights and stern men in badges. The neighbors gathered in quiet clusters on the sidewalk, whispering, trading stories about the house's cursed reputation. The detectives combed the scene for clues, but any answers seemed as elusive and fractured as the family's remaining sense of safety. The house showed no signs of forced entry, but the back door lock had been recently jimmied. The dog had marks on his muzzle, evidence that he'd been roughly muzzled or restrained. The violence in the bedroom suggested a furious struggle. Overturned drawers, John's fingernails broken and bloodied, clear signs he'd fought hard for his life. Forensic examination would later reveal fine fibers not from the house, a partial thumbprint on the doorknob, and a small piece of torn denim, the start of a tangled chain that would tie into the broader puzzle of the Watson family's tragedy. Police canvassed the area, gathering security footage, but the street cameras were outdated, their grainy footage catching only the restless shadows on a restless night. A neighbor's motion-activated camera recorded a hazy image, an SUV idling in the driveway for less than 7 minutes, headlights flicking off, a figure in a hoodie moving quickly towards the door. The autopsy revealed the cause of death was asphyxiation, with evidence of manual strangulation layered over blunt force trauma to the neck and jaw. John's injuries indicated he'd put up a desperate fight, defensive wounds on his hands, bruises on his arms, a broken rib that suggested he'd been slammed against the wall during the melee. Toxicology showed nothing unusual, ruling out the use of sedatives or poisons. What had happened to John was up close, personal, and enraged. Amy, devastated, became the FBI's and local law enforcement's primary witness. Her testimony painted a portrait of John as vigilant, worried, and recently on edge. She mentioned strange phone calls in the weeks leading to his death. No one on the other end, heavy breathing, clicks. John had told her he feared someone was watching the house but brushed this off to avoid frightening his children. Now, every minor worry took on the weight of an unheeded warning. As days became weeks, suspicion in the community grew and the media circled like vultures. Journalists reported on the string of deaths at 4567 Willow Avenue, pushing the cursed house narrative. But true crime sleuths and local rumor mongers began to look closer at John's personal life. The unresolved custody battle with his ex-wife, Emily, provided fertile ground for speculation. Emily, who had accused John of manipulating the children and hindering her visitation rights, became an early person of interest. Her alibi, a string of receipts and a silent aloneness in her new condo, didn't quite settle the nerves of investigators, especially coupled with her boyfriend's evasive answers under questioning. The investigation dragged on under the watchful eyes of both the community and national media, highlighting the splits and raw nerves in John's extended family. Old grudges re-emerged, some pointed at John's difficult relationship with his ex-wife. Others whispered about debts, old arguments, jealousies never resolved. The police were relentless, running checks on every visitor to the house that month, reviewing John's financial documents, dredging up every scrap of communication between him, Emily, her boyfriend, and even other relatives still bitter over inheritance and property lines. For Amy and the children, grief was mixed with a sweeping terror and the constant, invasive presence of the outside world. Amy spent nights plagued by guilt and half-thought nightmares, replaying her last conversation with John. If only she'd insisted he come to her house, if only she'd called the police, if only... The children went from room to room with haunted eyes, refusing to sleep alone, reluctant to even cross the threshold of the bedroom where their father died. Counselors came and went, but nothing seemed to dull the harshness of having their lives reduced to headlines and speculation. As the months passed, forensic breakthroughs began tying loose threads together. Security footage from nearby gas stations caught the same SUV seen in the neighbor's video, its license plate traced back to a rental in Emily's boyfriend's name. The torn denim matched jeans found among Emily's boyfriend's belongings, and further DNA analysis would uncover skin cells beneath John's fingernails that matched him. Slow, careful police work and modern technology at last revealed the grim orchestration behind John's murder, an act fueled by hatred, desperation, and perhaps envy, or a twisted sense of resolution for a bitterly divided family. Yet the most haunting detail would always remain Amy's final memory, the way John's voice sounded that night, hopeful and loving, unaware it would be the last anyone heard from him. In the end, John's death became the final link in a chain of violence that had started years before, amplifying the mythos of the house and leaving scars on everyone it touched. In the community, 4567 Willow Avenue became an unspoken warning, a place where pride, vengeance, and tragic miscommunication created a legacy darker than any ghost story, one marked by the ordinary yet profound loss of a man who, in his last moments, fought for his life and his children with everything he had left. Suspects and shocking secrets. As news of John Watson's violent and mysterious death rippled through the community, Springfield found itself perched on the edge of hysteria. By this point, the quiet street of Willow Avenue had become synonymous with heartbreak and suspicion, a place woven through with dark whispers and unresolved grief. For law enforcement, the years of accumulating tragedies at 4567 Willow Avenue signaled the impending eruption of something profoundly sinister. Now the challenge lay in unspooling the tangled web of potential suspects and hidden motives that had for too long been shrouded in silence and scandal. The investigation opened with a sense of urgency. Every stone overturned and long-standing feud re-examined under the harsh glare of suspicion. John's ex-wife Emily instantly became central to the inquiry. History had not treated the Watsons kindly. The animosity between John and Emily had only deepened following their bitter divorce and endless legal battles over the children. Friends and family members recalled volatile arguments in parking lots, custody hearings that ended with restraining orders, and a ceaseless exchange of accusations. The house itself had become a kind of battleground, one where every visit and interaction was laced with tension. Police interviews painted a picture of Emily as a woman battered by loss but also hardened by resentment. Court records cataloged her repeated allegations that John was an unfit father and that the Watson house was dangerous for the children. In turn, John had accused Emily of manipulation and emotional cruelty, suggesting she resented his new relationships and viewed every happiness he found as a personal affront. Neighbors testified about heated confrontations, sometimes spilling onto the front lawn, where Emily's voice rose above all others, sharp with warning. In a small town like Springfield, little remained secret for long, and public opinion was quick to divide into respective camps. Rumors swirled of late-night threats, cryptic notes left under windshield wipers, and veiled warnings spoken through clenched teeth, yet Emily was not the only one to draw suspicion. Her new boyfriend, Mark Harper, quickly fell under the microscope once it became apparent he had spent considerable time at the Watson house during the final months of John's life. Mark, a former high school athlete with a record of minor run-ins with the law, had only recently returned to Springfield after several years away. His presence alone seemed to fan the flames of neighborhood speculation. Some suggested he had always disliked John, seeing him as a lingering reminder of Emily's past. Others described Mark as brash, quick-tempered, and territorial, especially when it came to Emily or the children she shared with John. Mark's alibi was immediately suspect. He claimed to have spent the night of John's death with friends across town. However, phone records conflicted with his timeline, and at least one neighbor reported seeing his car parked a block away from Willow Avenue late that evening. Police retrieved security camera footage from nearby convenience stores, piecing together Mark's movements and noting long gaps where his whereabouts couldn't be accounted for. In the eyes of detectives, his calm demeanor in interviews bordered on rehearsed. His willingness to disparage John seemed less like honest grief, and more an effort to steer suspicion elsewhere. Tensions mounted further when friends of Emily came forward with unsettling stories. One recounted a heated argument between Mark and John less than a week before the murder, culminating in Mark vowing, "He'll pay for what he's done." Another described Emily's increasing paranoia in the weeks prior to the crime. Windows double-locked, phone calls placed at odd hours, and a growing stack of legal correspondence left untouched on her kitchen table. For investigators, the circumstantial evidence was compelling, but still stopped short of smoking gun proof. Beyond Emily and Mark, the police also examined other possible suspects, though their motives and means appeared murky at best. There was the estranged uncle, recently cut out of the will, who'd threatened litigation over the inheritance of family property. A longtime neighbor with a documented feud over property lines and late-night noise complaints. Even an old friend of John's, once a confidant whose business partnership with the Watson family had imploded over allegedly stolen funds. Each person had an alibi, but the strain of years spent circling the Watsons' troubles ensured that no one was fully above suspicion. Law enforcement broadened the search for clues. Forensic teams combed through the Watson house, recovering traces of foreign DNA and compiling a ledger of fingerprints found in unusual places. Computers and cell phones belonging to both John and Emily were analyzed, their browser histories and messaging records scrutinized for anything out of the ordinary. Investigators found several searches from Emily's laptop that raised eyebrows: methods of undetectable poisoning, how to erase digital footprints, and the legal definition of justifiable homicide. To many this was damning evidence. To Emily's attorneys, it could just as easily be explained by stress and paranoia, brought on by years of escalating conflict. The most explosive revelation came during the review of phone data. A series of deleted text messages between Emily and Mark revealed not only a shared animosity toward John, but also what seemed like covert planning, discussions about late-night meetings, mentions of taking care of things for good, and warnings to delete this after you read it. One thread, time-stamped just 2 days before John's death, referred cryptically to a window of opportunity, and made veiled references to the alarm system at 4567 Willow Avenue. These communications, when paired with Mark's inconsistent statements and Emily's internet searches, painted a chilling picture for the crime unit. While the digital trail seemed to point squarely in one direction, deeper secrets continued to surface. Forensic specialists found faint chemical traces in John's mug, likely a remnant of some household toxin, perhaps enough to cause confusion or drowsiness, leaving him vulnerable to a physical attack. DNA analysis from under John's fingernails found partial matches to Mark, though the forensic team pressed caution. The evidence was partial and could be subject to challenge. Still, the case against Emily and Mark appeared to grow more damning with each revelation, though defense attorneys would later cast doubt on claims of contamination and procedural error. But the greatest secret was not in what was uncovered, but in what the suspects themselves kept concealed. Over the course of the investigation, both Emily and Mark maintained their innocence, each portraying themselves as victims of a relentless smear campaign. Emily in particular adopted the persona of a beleaguered mother struggling to protect her children in the wake of unimaginable violence. Mark was less eloquent, more combative. He refused certain questions and demanded counsel at every turn. Their composure seemed at times either impressive or chillingly rehearsed. As investigators pressed forward, additional secrets from the home and family slowly came to light. A thumb drive hidden in John's study revealed voice recordings, some casual, some clearly intended as insurance, of shouted arguments between himself and Emily. There were references to threats, blackmail, and the possibility that John feared for his safety in the days before his murder. A journal entry, hastily penned the week before his death, read simply, "If anything happens, look to Emily and Mark." Publicly, the case became a flashpoint for speculation and rumor. True crime podcasts obsessed over every detail, online forums teemed with conspiracy theories, and Springfield's local paper ran daily headlines as new information emerged. The community divided itself into camps, some convinced the police had their perpetrators, others certain the truth was more complicated, rooted in years of generational trauma and secrets so deeply held that they would never fully see the light. Law enforcement, feeling the pressure of a story that had now ballooned far beyond a local tragedy, moved to secure arrests. Emily and Mark were both taken into custody amid a storm of media attention, their faces splashed across news broadcasts and the internet alike. In interrogation, their stories shifted, then coalesced, each attempting to minimize their own involvement while subtly implicating the other. The secrets they had both so carefully guarded were now public property, dissected daily by legal experts, armchair detectives, and reporters alike. And yet, behind all the sensational headlines and the constant churn of new evidence, one fact remained unshakably clear. The night John died, someone had moved through the rooms of the Watson house with intent. Whether driven by vengeance, greed, heartbreak, or years of unresolved animosity, the suspects and the secrets they harbored would shape not just the story of one family, but of an entire community struggling to reconcile with the darkness that had flourished right in their midst. Exposing the conspiracy, technology, and DNA speak out. In the weeks following John's murder, the investigation entered a new phase, one that would blend cutting-edge technology with classic detective work, in a desperate race to unmask the killer hiding among everyday faces. As rumors rippled through Springfield, public anxiety reached its peak. True crime fans speculated rabidly online, but inside the windowless office of the local police department, a handful of determined tech experts and forensics analysts prepared to put their skills to the ultimate test, determined to ensure that the truth could not remain buried beneath years of family secrets and neighborhood gossip. From the outset, the detectives recognized that traditional policing alone would not solve the mystery of 4567 Willow Avenue. What began as a grim parade of witness statements, door-to-door interviews, and combing through physical evidence quickly expanded into a digital dragnet. Every scrap of data, every bite of information from the weeks and days leading up to John's death was brought in for review. No one was immune from scrutiny. The victim, his ex-wife Emily, her new partner Mark, various family members, even the children's nannies and neighbors, all faced an unblinking, algorithmically precise examination. The first seismic breakthrough came from the forensics lab, DNA analysis. Investigators obtained samples from underneath John's fingernails, the edge of his bedsheet, and from a coffee cup on his nightstand. The results were revealing. A partial match to Mark's genetic profile showed up in the samples, placing him at the heart of the scene around the time of the fatal incident. While Mark insisted he had merely stopped by the house earlier in the evening for a quick drop-off, the DNA evidence told a more incriminating story. Detectives, still aware of the potential for contamination or innocent explanations, pressed forward, combining this clue with a wider net of technological data. A court order was swiftly secured to extract digital evidence from electronics found throughout the house. The team imaged John's computer, extracted phone and tablet backups, and sent the family home's smart security system for expedited review. What they discovered was an intricate web of texts, emails, voice notes, and internet search histories, each fragment painting a slightly clearer picture of the paranoia, planning, and emotional escalation within the Watson family ecosystem. The security system provided its own revelations. Anomalous logins around midnight, long after John had supposedly gone to bed, indicated someone with intimate knowledge of the alarm codes had entered the house. Cameras were mysteriously disabled for a 30-minute window matching the likely time of death. The engineering team traced these events to a remote access code registered on Emily's mobile device. This digital fingerprint, combined with GPS pings from both Emily and Mark's smartphones that placed them in or around the house that night, undermined the alibis they so vehemently maintained. Yet the technology told more than just timelines. Police analysts rebuilt deleted threads of text message exchanges between Emily and Mark, revealing a darkly strategic relationship marked by mutual suspicion and Machiavellian plotting. One chilling exchange the day before John's death read, "You have to do it if you want them gone for good. The system will be off. Use the back door." Another, sent in the early morning after the murder, whispered, "Don't forget to wipe everything. If anyone asks, I was with you all night." Faced with mounting evidence, detectives looked further, collaborating with outside experts in digital forensics. They recovered files Emily thought were gone forever, web search histories focused on untraceable toxins, symptoms of slow suffocation, and how to erase phone data after a crime. Data synced to her cloud account revealed an obsessive stockpiling of news stories about unsolved domestic homicides and legal guides for avoiding evidence at trial. The physical-digital overlap was most damning. A single glove found behind the fence in the backyard contained traces of both John's and Mark's DNA. Security camera stills captured a grainy but distinctive silhouette slipping down the driveway minutes after the murder. When presented with this, Mark's calm facade began to fracture during interrogation. He alternated between stuttering rationalizations and outright denials, but his alibi was now rendered all but impossible to sustain in light of the overwhelming digital and biological trail. Emily, under pressure, invoked her right to counsel and maintained her innocence. Yet the totality of the evidence, timed security code entries, geographic tracking, DNA from under John's nails, and a damning search history, left little room for reasonable doubt in the minds of the authorities. Even the best defense lawyer struggled to explain away the digital footprints connecting her and Mark to the crime scene and to each other in a tightly woven web of intent and access. As the tech investigation concluded, the detectives reflected grimly on how the methods of modern crime had grown intertwined with the minutiae of contemporary life. Every text, every GPS ping, every strand of hair or cell left behind was a potential witness, while emotions and hearsay could muddy the waters of motive. Technology and forensic genetics had become the silent, objective narrators of how tragedy played out. In the end, it was not a confession nor a witness that cracked the Watson case wide open. It was the relentless, emotionless logic of code and the individuality of DNA, science illuminating the darkest corners where lies tried to hide. The historic trial, judgment, and lingering regret. The historic trial that followed the unraveling of the Watson family tragedy gripped not just Springfield but much of Illinois, with national headlines fanning the flames of public fascination. It was more than the prosecution of a brutal murder. It was a public reckoning with the failures of a community, gaps in the justice system, and the kind of grief that leaves entire neighborhoods forever haunted. The trial, held in the imposing county courthouse on 5th Street, unfolded for weeks in a charged atmosphere of anticipation, outrage, and sometimes morbid curiosity. The legal theater begins jury selection was itself a battleground. Defense and prosecution teams combed through hundreds of Springfield residents, dismissing anyone who admitted prior knowledge from the relentless media coverage. Still, it was impossible to find 12 citizens untouched by rumor or opinion. The chosen jury, 6 men and 6 women, diverse in both background and sentiment, was sequestered from the public eye, their lives placed on hold as they became the arbiters of the most sensational criminal case in town history. On the prosecution side, Assistant District Attorney Olivia Grant led a team armed with a damning array of forensics, digital evidence, and witness testimony. She opened with a chilling timeline of the months leading up to John Watson's death, a pattern of threats, covert messages, and orchestrated encounters that she argued amounted to premeditation. The courtroom listened spellbound as she pieced together texts, security footage, and the results of DNA testing, painting a scenario in which every action was a calculated move toward murder. Defense strategies and desperate gambits. The defense, representing both Emily and Mark, was equally formidable. Their tactics were twofold: discredit the police investigation and sow doubt about the forensics. Lead counsel Charles Bishop challenged every link in the chain of custody for key evidence, hinting at cross-contamination, procedural slip-ups, and even underlying bias due to the family's notoriety. He cross-examined forensic experts, using advanced legal gymnastics to spotlight uncertainties most jurors never knew existed. For Emily, the defense played heavily on her breakdown after years of psychological abuse, characterizing her as a traumatized mother swept up in circumstances beyond her control. For Mark, they cast him as a scapegoat, an outsider drawn into family drama and unfairly targeted by authorities eager for a conviction after years of unclosed cases. Witnesses and testimony. Over 24 witnesses took the stand. Neighbors recalled late-night arguments and strange visitors. Friends shared insights into the couple's tumultuous dynamic, including veiled threats and the gradual breakdown of trust. Digital forensics experts painstakingly reconstructed text messages, explaining in layman's terms how deleted did not always mean gone. The Watson children, accompanied by a guardian ad litem, gave heartbreaking testimony about the fear and confusion brewing in their fractured home. Perhaps the most pivotal testimony came from Dr. Kavita Prasad, the forensic pathologist. She detailed not just the physical evidence, the bruises, the toxins, the timeline, but translated the language of trauma for laymen. Her clear, methodical explanations left a heavy silence each time she stepped down from the stand. Jurors were visibly moved by her unemotional accounting of the violence that had marked every stage of the case. The defense countered with their own experts. Conflicting opinions were presented regarding the reliability of security system data, the specificity of the DNA match, and the possibility of medical conditions that could muddle the cause of death. At several points, legal wrangling over admissibility and expert credibility nearly derailed the entire proceeding, yet Judge Arlen Brodsky, stoic and precise, kept the trial on course, determined to see justice, whatever form it might take, firmly delivered. Community and media sensation. Outside the courthouse, Springfield became a stage for protest and pilgrimage. Some locals demanded accountability, not just for the murder, but for the institutional failures that had allowed familial conflict to fester so long. Others pushed back, insisting that grief and chaos had been manipulated by law enforcement eager for a win. Every day, TV trucks lined the square, online forums buzzed with speculation, and families whispered about what the case revealed: the fragility of trust, the dangers lurking behind calm facades, and the volatility embedded in American suburbia. Media attention also heightened the stakes. The national press dissected everything from court fashion to emotional breakdowns. True crime podcasts dispatched hosts to the courthouse steps, their microphones picking up local color while recapping the ugliest moments of the trial. Some accused the coverage of turning real pain into spectacle, while others argued that exposure was the only way to demand accountability from systems that so often fail the most vulnerable. Deliberation and verdict jury deliberation stretched into its third day. Behind closed doors, 12 ordinary people wrestled with guilt, doubt, and the sobering weight of ending or affirming lives with a simple vote. The forensic evidence was overwhelming but not unassailable. The motives, while clear, danced on the edge of reasonable doubt. Every voice around the table brought a new angle: the betrayal, the mental illness, the history of police error, the children's suffering. When the verdict was read, an electric tension gripped the courtroom. Mark was found guilty of first-degree murder, life imprisonment without parole, the judge intoning the sentence with an air of finality that chilled everyone present. Emily, though convicted on lesser charges for conspiracy and evidence tampering, saw the jury deadlock on the central count of murder. The final tally was a half-step between vindication and tragedy. One person condemned, one forever marked but never fully exonerated nor completely forgiven. Aftermath. Regret lingers. For the Watson children there was no winning. They watched, numb and weary, as the adults in their lives were sentenced, some to prison, others to lives of quiet disgrace. The surviving relatives retreated, angry and unsatisfied, furious with a process they deemed both slow and partial. Even as the courthouse emptied and media crews packed away, a persistent bitterness hovered. Springfield had wanted closure. Instead, it got more questions, unanswered wounds, and a haunting reminder of how little a courtroom verdict can truly resolve. In the years since, the trial has been studied in law schools and profiled in countless re-examinations. For some, it is a lesson in the power and pitfalls of forensic technology. For others, a parable about fractured families and the limits of justice. But for those closest to the Watson story, the echoes refuse to fade, loss lingering in empty hallways on Willow Avenue, regret etched in stone at the edge of the local cemetery, and the unshakable knowledge that some tragedies can never find a verdict strong enough to heal them. Afterthoughts, a society and justice system, needing transformation. In the aftermath of the Watson family tragedy, Springfield, Illinois, became a microcosm for America's struggle with the limitations and flaws embedded within its justice system. It's ground zero for reflection, outrage, and eventually, slow, halting calls for reform. Even as new paint graced the walls of 4,567 Willow Avenue and a new family quietly tried to fill the haunted rooms with laughter, the ghosts of the past refused to fade. The town's very fabric, its local institutions, and the individuals who had lived closest to the trauma, bore the enduring scars of a calamity that was never just personal, it was communal and systemic. For months after the curtain fell on the sensational trial, the town was awash in impassioned dialogue, public forums, and scathing editorials, fiercely debating the shortcomings laid bare by the Watson case. Neighbors, many of whom had comfortably coexisted for decades, realized the ease with which silence, denial, and willful ignorance had allowed escalating conflict behind closed doors to go unaddressed. On Willow Avenue, the sight of police cars became a daily fixture. On local radio shows, callers questioned the adequacy of police training, the competence of forensic personnel, and above all, the empathy, or lack thereof, displayed by those tasked with protecting vulnerable individuals. Conversations about accountability grew more nuanced and sometimes divisive. Why had allegations of domestic abuse and child endangerment gone unheeded for years? How had so many red flags escaped the notice of social workers, school counselors, and neighbors? If an educated, affluent family in a suburban stronghold like Springfield could fall victim to such a spiral of secrecy and violence, what hope was there for those without the same privileges or access? To many, the Watson tragedy exposed a justice system more reactive than proactive, ill-equipped to handle complex modern family dynamics and the hidden traumas festering behind even the prettiest front doors. The role of technology and digital forensics in the convictions brought another philosophical reckoning. Within days of the verdict, advocacy groups called for mandatory technological literacy and ongoing science-based training for law enforcement. No longer, they argued, could any serious investigation rely solely on intuition or experience. Reporters, meanwhile, pondered the ethical dilemmas. What safeguards existed to prevent evidence from being misread, planted, or manipulated by those with the means? When data became as consequential as blood spatter or a fingerprint, the boundary between truth and narrative grew murky. The criminal's digital trail was as likely to be painted by fear, confusion, and self-preservation as by malice. For Springfield itself, the Watson saga injected a lasting skepticism toward both official narratives and the eager, sometimes reckless storytelling of true crime media. Even as national broadcasters flocked to Willow Avenue seeking salacious sound bites, many locals recoiled from the glare, sharing a sense that their suffering had become just another chapter in America's endless romance with tragedy as entertainment. Town meetings turned into roundtables on privacy, trauma-informed community engagement, and how neighbors could better look out for each other. At the local schools, teachers and administrators scrambled to implement new mental health and conflict resolution programs, though always with budgets and a sense of exhaustion stretched thin. Yet what truly lingered was an undercurrent of lost innocence. parents held their children closer, more wary of secrets festering inside other homes as well as their own. Rumors persisted about the new owners at 4567 Willow Avenue. Did they know what had happened? Would they too succumb to the so-called curse? Or would they finally transform the symbol of social collapse into a story of redemption? Across the state, politicians seized on the headlines, each promising sweeping reforms: more funding for crisis intervention teams, increased transparency in forensic procedures, mandatory reporting laws with teeth. Civil rights organizations highlighted how cases like the Watsons, while extraordinary, unveiled broader truths about racial bias, economic inequity, and the cycles of mistrust that festered between police and the public. The Watson tragedy also forced a reckoning with forgiveness and the boundaries of communal healing. Some residents fixated on punishment, lobbying for ever harsher penalties to make an example of wrongdoers. Others, haunted by how the pain rippled outward to children and bystanders, spoke out for restorative justice, urging compassion and second chances. Local faith leaders found themselves fielding questions they could not easily answer. Why do good people do terrible things? How does grief transmute into vengeance, or can it ever give way to grace? For every exoneration, every conviction, and every decision to move on, there remain the ghosts of what might have been. Families left fractured, trust forever shaken, and a town forced to grow up all at once. Still, the story of the Watson family did, in time, become a catalyst for tangible change. In Springfield, a grassroots coalition emerged, composed of survivors, mental health professionals, ex-law enforcement officers, and ordinary citizens, dedicated to educating the public about the dynamics of domestic violence, the warning signs of escalating conflict, and where to turn for help before it's too late. The City Council established a permanent task force on justice reform, extending beyond the scope of one infamous crime to examine policing, prosecution, and even the media's role in shaping perception and outcome. Grants were secured to modernize forensic equipment, streamline interagency communication, and provide targeted training in crisis de-escalation and trauma-informed care. At the courthouse, new protocols were enacted for high-profile cases, strict guidelines for evidence admissibility, jury selection insulated from media frenzy, and mental health screening for those involved in lengthy or traumatic trials. The local police department began actively recruiting diverse talent, aiming to better reflect and serve the community it policed. Schools too became more vigilant about bullying, isolation, and familial red flags, understanding at last that the front lines of justice often start not with a badge or a gavel, but at the breakfast table and in the classroom. For Watson's neighbors, there was no simple resolution, no collective exhale or reset button. Instead, healing became the work of years. Quiet conversations at backyard fences, candlelight vigils, communal meals that signaled a recommitment to trust. For some, passing by the infamous house still conjured memories too sharp to face. For others, it was a cautionary tale, a reminder that even in the heart of American suburbia, vigilance and kindness are crucial. Slowly but surely, 4567 Willow Avenue shed its notoriety, becoming simply another home, though the memory of sirens, headlines, and the whispered phrase, "It could have been any of us," would never fully leave. In the end, the Watson tragedy left Springfield transformed, but not defined by its trauma. The wounds it inflicted spurred a reckoning, a turning inward and outward, forcing town leaders, neighbors, and even distant policymakers to confront the simple, stubborn truth that a fair society is never the default, but always unceasingly an act of conscious creation. As the years passed, the story of the Watsons stopped being told as only a cautionary tale. It became, in the hearts and actions of those left behind, a spark, however painful, for real, unfinished change. And that, perhaps, is the most enduring legacy left haunting Willow Avenue, not the curse of tragedy, but the possibility of renewal.